Well, good morning, guys. It is great to see you, and I want to first of all start out by just saying thanks to all of you for adjusting your schedules so that you could be here today. It's really great to have you here, not on a Tuesday, but on a Thursday. We're going to have a great time together. I thought I would start this morning picking up on where we left off at the very end of last week, and that is, if you remember, at the end of last week, we talked about upgrading our manhood, and that at the end of our journey together, we would put together a better man card. And to get us there, I mentioned to you every week on your outline, at the bottom of your outline, you would have a better man question to reflect on from session to session. Well, if you look on your handout this morning, you'll see it there. And let me just cover it for just a second, what it says. It says this: before our next session, take a moment this week reflecting on your notes and then answer the following question. What possible action step could I take from this session, which would be this session this morning, that could upgrade my manhood and make me a better man? Be specific and write down your answer. Now, guys, as we go through, by the time we finish our journey, you're going to have 9 possible action steps if you take this seriously. And I want to implore you to take this seriously, because this is the best of our journey, is you processing yourself, your own masculinity, and things maybe that you could do that could better align your masculine wheels to live as a better man. And if you'll do that week to week and keep your notes, then at the end of our time together, as we mentioned last week, we'll ask you to take those, at that point, 9 possible action steps and reduce it to 3 that you think would be the most impactful on your life as a man. And if you do that, put it on your Better Man card, and then over the months that follow our time together, you actually begin to implement some of those things that you've thought through. That's what I call intentional living. And you make some intentional upgrades in your manhood, then I can promise you, months from now, years from now, you'll be so glad you attended here. And what's even better, those around you who are part of your life will be happy you did that as well. Okay. Having said that, we want to address a key element for what I call building a better manhood that works, and that is, on our session today, is an issue I call looking back. Looking backward, by the way, reminds me of the story of Steve. And Steve was a guy who suddenly became aware that he was in heaven. He was at the pearly gates. He was just amazed that suddenly he was there, and he heard this voice that said, "Hey, Steve." And he turned around, he said, "I'm St. Peter. Let's visit for just a moment." So Steve pulled over to the side, and St. Peter said to him, "Hey, we're so glad you're here, but we want to take a little moment and just talk together. I want to look back on your life. And so would you mind us doing that? I want to hear about what you did on earth." Of course, that made Steve a little nervous, but he said, "Okay, fine." And so St. Peter said to him, "Well, Steve, let me ask you, as you look back on earth, what's one thing that you did that was really, really good?" And Steve thought for a moment. He said, "Well, I was a referee in the SEC." And St. Peter said, "Oh, I love the SEC." He said, "Really?" He said, "Well, I was in the SEC and I was at this big game between LSU and Ole Miss in Tiger Stadium in front of this rowdy crowd." And St. Peter said, "Oh, I know the crowd at Tiger Stadium. They're not just crazy, they're scary crazy." And Steve said, "Yeah, they are scary crazy." Anyway, it came down to the last play of the game, and Ole Miss kicked a field goal to win the game and missed it. But I noticed that an LSU player was offsides. So I threw a flag and gave Ole Miss the chance to kick the field goal again, and they did, and they won the game. And St. Peter went, "That is amazing. That is absolutely amazing. You did that in Tiger Stadium?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, Steve, let me tell you, that's not only really, really good, but that's really, really brave." He said, "When did you do that?" And Steve said, "Oh, just about 5 minutes ago." Okay, let's do a little review from last week. We talked about where we are today as men, and if you remember, we men are facing some stiff winds today. There's the challenge that we lack a unified vision of masculinity. We talked about that. We talked about the challenge of dark manhood a lot of it coming from absent dads. We talked about the challenge of a radically changing social landscape. And then we talked about the challenge of the lies we men tend to believe about ourselves if we don't get real and get raw with other men. We talk to ourselves, and we talk too long to ourselves, and we convince ourselves of things that aren't true, and then we live out of those lies, and they have unfortunately a negative impact on our lives. Those are just some of the headwinds that we're facing in this challenging culture. Today I'd like to talk about another challenge, but it's not so much a challenge that's facing us going forward, but it's the challenge of looking back. And so that's what I want to talk about today. You see, when it comes to building a better manhood, a manhood that actually works, our past as men is extremely important. That's because of so much of what we do today, right now, so much of why we react the way we react right now, so much of the way we feel today, right now. All those things don't happen right now. They really don't. Quite the contrary. They were birthed and molded and shaped by people and circumstances and situations out of our past, back in time, wrapped up and passed into the present, and then we live them out, many times unknowingly and unconsciously, of how we're being impacted by them. I find it interesting, guys, that as I've worked with men, that many men have never taken the time to connect the dots between their past and their present to make sense out of it. So when someone says maybe to you, what makes you withdraw like that? You're always withdrawing and getting alone and getting away from everybody and spending a lot of time in isolation. Why do you do that? Or somebody says to us, why do you get so angry? Why do things just burst out of you? Or somebody says to you, why do you work all the time? Why is that so important to you? Or what makes you act that way? Or why can't you share your feelings? Maybe your wife says that to you from time to time. And they're pressing for you to open up and share your heart. You know, for a lot of guys in this room, when we get asked questions like that, we don't have an answer. We're not really sure why we do that and act that way and react that way. I like the story of the London tourist who was watching a demonstration of the Queen's Royal Artillery. It was a 6-man team. They were very precise in their drills that the tourists got to observe. Well, actually, there weren't 6 guys in that precision. There were 6 men standing, 6 soldiers. Only 5 of them actually participated in the drill. And when it was over, one of the tourists walked up to the staff officer and said, hey, I noticed this drill. Man, you guys did it great. What does this one guy do just standing there? And the staff officer says, oh, that's just number 6. He just stands at attention while we do the drill. And the tourist said, yeah, but why? And the staff officer thought for a moment and said, I don't really know why. So they went and they looked at an old Army training manual to find the answer of why 5 guys do the drill and 1 guy just stands there. And as they looked in this old manual, they found the answer. Soldier number 6 was there because in the past, he was the one who would hold the horses that pulled the artillery wagons. But they hadn't had horses for over 100 years. And yet there he was. They had forgotten the past. And the point is this. Behind every big why are you this way question about your life, why do you do this? Why do you act like this? Why do you react the way you do? Behind every one of those why questions, there is a story somewhere in your past that helped shape you to do those things. There's a reason why you do that, but maybe you've forgotten or have ignored that past. You're like soldier number 6. You're just standing there not sure why you are the way you are. You're just showing up for life right now today. Everybody has a story. Everybody has a story. And behind that story is our past and the events of our past. Which brings us to our challenge today of looking back. And here's what I want you to know. Many of us guys have never taken the time to really look back and make sense out of it. Not in a probing kind of way that would explain in a much more detailed way us, listen, us to us. We've never really thought about it. Put those dots together that explains us to us. And yet without that deeper understanding of our story, listen, it's hard to properly address your own personal life and some of the sticking points that right now are probably in your manhood. And you can't get unstuck because you don't know why you are the way you are, how you got that way. You don't know the whys from your past. You have what is called, in some ways, the unexamined life. Now there's a great quote. Some of you probably pulled to mind when I said that. Unexamined life. The quote is this: the unexamined life is not worth living. Unexamined manhood, I found, working with men, is hard to live. We're dealing with the action of right now, but there are things dragging us down from yesterday that we don't understand. You know, everybody has a story, and the challenge is hearing and understanding your story. Have you ever told your story to somebody in detail? Because it's so important to understand our story, we need the help of others to kind of listen and probe and ask questions and help us put our story together. Have you ever done that? You know, I had two buddies and we made a commitment to do that together. So we each, one year, took an entire day for each of us to tell our story. And as we did, the other guys listened and asked questions and made comments and brought insight into that. It was amazing how much that helped me, and I think helped the other guys, connecting those dots together. Have you ever done that? The insights that I gained from that time are some insights that I'd like to share with you guys this morning to kind of model what I'm going to be talking about. Because a lot of you guys don't know me, so I thought, hey, I'll tell you my story, and then maybe that'll model or be an example to you of how to tell your own story. So what I want to do for just a second, and it's on your outline, I'll move through these points. I want to take you back to the 1950s and introduce you to my family. In the 1950s, I grew up in a real small town in Louisiana, Ruston, Louisiana, and I would say we were the typical Southern small town family, except in two ways. The first was that unlike most families in Ruston, both my parents worked. And that was unusual, that both my parents would work. We were, as I used to say, we were the modern family before it was modern. The second thing was that my family, though we were on a church roll, we rarely went to church. In fact, my greatest memories of Sunday morning is my parents telling me, you can't go outside until it's afternoon because we don't want people to see us, out in the yard having fun or whatever while everybody else is going to church. So we would stay inside. That was kind of the rule until after the church hour. I never really saw my parents pray. I do remember one occasion where the Methodist pastor came to make a home visit at my house. My parents were tighter than ticks on that moment. And we all got kind of dressed up. Mom cleaned up the house. The pastor came in. We all sat down dutifully as he just asked he was a very gentle guy, asking us some questions, trying to encourage us. And I'll never forget when he walked out the door, my mom shut the door and leaned up against the door and said, "Oh man, I'm glad that's over." That was what it was like growing up. And I didn't think much about spiritual things. I do remember having one, what I call spiritual conversation with my dad. And that's when my dog, Sandy, got run over right outside of our house. And I remember how much it broke my heart because I love that dog. And I remember going out and picking that dog off the street, putting it into the trunk of my dad's car. We drove out together on the outside of town. He dug a little grave and he was putting the dog in the grave. And I looked at my dad and I said, Daddy, is Sandy going to go to heaven? And I remember the big question mark on his face. And he mumbled something. I don't even remember what he said. But I could tell real clear he wasn't sure and didn't know what to say to me. And let me tell you, I marked that moment as a young boy because I said to myself, and this is kind of the past now connecting to the future, I said, I want to know how you go to heaven. And that was just a little seed in there that grew over my life. I want to know, how do you go to heaven? That's what it felt like growing up in our house. We really weren't that religious. I want to introduce you to my family. First, I want to introduce you to my dad. This is in the 1950s. Thomas Charles Lewis. My dad grew up in a very well-to-do home. His mom was the daughter of a big judge in North Louisiana, so she came with a lot of wealth. My dad's dad was the editor of the local paper, founder of the Ruston Daily Leader, editor of the paper. They had a big home on a hill and that kind of thing. He kind of grew up as as kind of a spoiled young man. Dropped out of college early in the 30s, went to California. I've never heard what he did out there for a number of years, but I think he just went out to have a good time. Eventually he came back, joined the military in World War II, went and fought in France with an artillery unit, came back, set up a little insurance agency, and that's what I remember growing up. My dad having the Thomas Lewis Insurance Agency there in Ruston. Here's my mom. Her name is Lily Ethel Taylor Lewis, the last of 10 children, a farmer's daughter, growing up in this little town called Farmerville. But maybe because she was the last of 10, she was very strong-willed, colorful, ambitious. She actually went to Belhaven College and played college basketball. My mom had a mean jump shot, by the way. She'd play with us out in the backyard. But she went and worked as the office manager of a large law firm there in Ruston. One of her lawyers became lieutenant governor of the state of Louisiana. But I just remember my mom being very strong and aggressive in our home. Then there was my older brother, Charles. Charles was 4 years older than me. Charles was very artistic. When he graduated from college in honors, he got an invitation to go to the Los Angeles School of Art. Unfortunately, the Vietnam War had just broken out. He got drafted, went to Washington, D.C., became an interpreter in the Navy, and then when he got out of the Navy, decided he wanted to go to law school, went to law school, and became a lawyer in Houston, Texas. It was when he was in Houston that my brother decided, this is early on, decided to come out and declare himself gay. And you can imagine the impact that had on our family in those early years before people really understood all the dynamics of the gay movement. Unfortunately, my brother also died of AIDS at 44 years old. Then there was my younger brother, John, who I kind of call John a Renaissance guy. Grew up playing classical guitar, majored in Japanese history. He became a world-class fly fisherman and hunter. Moved to Wyoming for 8 years just so he could live in the outback and do those things. Then decided, after I had the privilege of introducing him to Jesus Christ, then decided he wanted to go to seminary. And by his second year in seminary, he was teaching Greek and Hebrew at the seminary. And that's what he did for 25 years before he retired. But John is a very talented and outgoing individual. And then there's me, less intelligent than my two brothers. Got lost in sports. That was kind of my world, the world of sports. That was my ticket out of Ruston. So that's our family. And for 17 years, these 5 people at 308 South Bonner in Ruston, Louisiana, we were pressed together to interact with one another. And over that time, 1,000 experiences just like you shaped and scripted the person I am today. Just like you. And those ties and those dots are back there, always active. They never go away. And it's important that we understand what they all mean. So here's what I learned as I interacted with my buddies. I kind of put them in categories. Here are just some things that I think really impacted my life. First of all, there were some good moments in my life that I carry to this day. I felt generally supported by my parents growing up. They were involved in my school. They attended my games. They let my friends hang out at our house. Those were always fun things. My mom made it fun to be at our house. I still have great memories of going to Florida. That was our big vacation every year for a number of years, where we'd go to Florida. Of course, back in the 50s, our car was one of those cars that we didn't have air conditioning. Both my parents smoked, so it was an endurance to drive to Florida and back for these three boys sitting in the back seat, coughing and trying to breathe. But that's the way it was. There was a few times, guys, my dad was not real involved in my life, but there were a few times where he took my brother John and I fishing. In fact, I think there were 3 times we went fishing. And on those outings, it was just us and Dad. We'd get up early in the morning, go have a little breakfast, drive, get out on the lake and fish all day and laugh and have experiences. And to this day, I look back, when I think of my dad, I think of the lake and the joy of just being with Dad. I wish it was a lot more, but those were definitely good moments. And by the way, connecting the dots, I remember looking back, I thought, right there was the starting place of me saying in my young adolescent heart, when I grow up, I want to have times like this with my boys. I'm going to make time. Then there were some noble moments in our family. I'll just mention a few. The way my mom cared for her aging parents taught me a lot about family loyalty. The way my dad honored his country. One big memory of my dad was him getting up at 3 in the morning and leading a group of men on Veterans Day out where they would put flags on every grave of veterans in our city. My dad led that. And that gave me, without ever being in the military, a great love for my country and our military. The way my dad treated other people taught me about human dignity. And because my dad didn't say a lot, but sometimes he did things that were really noble. One was, I remember there was a young African American boy that lived not far from us, but didn't have a dad. And my dad kind of took him under his wing and gave him odd jobs and encouraged him. And eventually, James came into our house, and because my mom and dad both worked, James kind of was our adopted brother, so to speak, where he babysat and helped and did all these kind of things. And I remember one moment that really sticks out in my mind, when I became probably 9 or 10, James was at our house. My mom and dad were out at some dinner party or whatever. And we were acting up, and James got on me for acting up. And I got real mad at him. That's the 50s. So I looked at James and I called him the N-word. And I can remember the pain and anger on his face. And he grabbed me. He put me over his knee and gave me a couple of swats on the rear end, said, "Don't call me that." And I said, "James, you hit me. I'm going to tell my daddy when he comes home you hit me." And I remember a little later on, I could see James was nervous about that. So my parents come in. The first thing they did when they came in, I came running to my dad and said, "James hit me, James hit me." And my dad said, "What happened?" And I remember, "James, tell me what happened." And James looked at my dad and said, "Mr. Lewis, Robert called me the N-word." And the next thing I knew, I was flying through the air with my dad's hand on my hand, kind of swung around over his knee, and he wore me out. And when he finished, he pulled me up and he looked in my face and he said, "Don't you ever say that again." And from that point on, not only did I not say that again, it gave me a whole new appreciation about people. And I watched my dad with James over the years, and James was the first person in his family to go to college with my dad's help. When I saw James not long ago in Ruston, Louisiana, he's got a great job. All his kids have gone to college. But a lot of that started with my dad putting dignity in James's life by the way he treated him and treated me in relationship to him. Those were noble moments. There were also missed moments. My dad, for whatever reason, didn't know how to engage his sons. So we really had no critical life instruction. I don't think I ever heard my dad say anything about girls. So girls were always a mystery. 3 boys growing up together. Girls were just a mystery out there. Never heard anything about girls or how to interact with girls. Didn't know anything about money. I didn't actually sign a check or even know how to do that until I went to college. Didn't know how to tie a tie. Didn't know how to work on a car. A lot of my friends knew how to change the oil and do that thing. All I knew is when they lifted the hood, there was just this big iron thing with wires coming out of it. And sometimes when you get in discussions about life and you don't have any practical life skills, you get laughed at, or you feel foolish, or you feel ignorant. And it makes you mad, doesn't it? Because you don't know how to engage all that. So you just feel incompetent. And let me tell you what I've learned. Nothing makes a man more unstable or feeling more or less valuable than when he feels like, I can't do it. There were a lot of things I couldn't do in basic life skills. I remember my senior year, after football season, I was being recruited by LSU and Ole Miss and Arkansas and all that. I got so confused in all that recruiting. And I remember going to my dad and saying, Dad, I don't know what to do. And I remember he just looked at me and said, your decision. That was it. My decision. There was no, let's talk about it. Let's work that through. Let's look at the good and the bad of each school. It's just your decision. Boy, that hurt. There was no emotional closeness in our family with my dad especially. My mom, much better, but my dad especially. No hugs. I never heard my dad say, I love you. Never heard him say, I'm proud of you. Never heard him come and put his arm around me and say, man, you're good at this. Never heard any of those things. He was what I call the invisible dad. He was there, but he wasn't there. Some of you guys had that experience. Just like me. Dad was around, maybe, but not engaged in the family. So you just really never felt like you knew him as Dad. There were hurtful moments in our family. My dad started struggling with alcohol when I was school age. It got to be full-blown alcoholism by the time I hit high school. And of course, that created an incredible conflict between my mom and dad. There were lots of fights. And you know, it's tough when you're 16 years old and you're the referee. Some of you guys had that experienced. Or maybe you did like my brothers did. I was foolish enough to try to step in and think I could negotiate that. My brothers just got out of Dodge. They just ran. But when you're interacting and hearing all that, it hurts. You feel a certain shame. And around town, when I'd hear little whispers in corners about my dad from other men, where they were just kind of saying, yeah, Tommy's got real trouble with the bottle. You know, when you're wanting your family to mean something and you hear that, you just feel like your name, the name Lewis, got demeaned. And you feel shame with that. I want to share with you one defining moment before we move on with this. I just want you to hear my story. That's who I am. But I think this picture says it all. This is kind of a defining moment for me. That's me getting married, guys. Believe it or not, that is me. And that's my family taking a family photo. So take a look at it. What do you notice about that? What's missing? What's missing is my dad. Here's this wedding, all the joy of that, and my dad didn't show up. We didn't know where he was until later. What he was so drunk he couldn't get out of bed. And I remember, this is connecting the dots. I remember after the reception, I got in the car to drive to our little honeymoon location, and as we were passing the Ruston city limit sign, I said to myself these words, I'm going to be better than that. I'm going to be better than that. And that's how I launched out into life, with that anger And with that determination, I was going to do something with my life, but it wasn't going to look like that. So I left home. And I left home like everybody else, looking normal on the outside, but with a lot of conflicting winds and currents on the inside. I felt unprepared. Let me tell you, I went to the college campus at the University of Arkansas and walked on there. I didn't know what major, how to study. I was just there to play football and just try to survive. Didn't know how to interact with girls, deal with the alcohol and all that on the college campus that I was suddenly confronted with. But there I was, really confused. I had a pride during the Vietnam War for America. I'd stand up to my protesting friends and make a case for why we were in the war. I didn't know what I was talking about, but I just was carrying this pride for America because there was a dot back there that told me that was important. I emotionally pretty much shut down. I didn't feel much because to feel anything hurt, except anger. I could express anger. That worked okay on the football field, but not with relationships. But I could really get ticked off quick. I felt overly responsible for everything. I had to make it work. Measuring up meant everything. To succeed was so wonderful because you got feedback, but to fail was the ultimate purgatory. Because to fail meant you weren't good enough. And I was driven by the theme, you've got to be good enough. So that's how I went out into life. That's my story. That's who I am today in part. And some of those themes I've now understood, which has helped me correct some things, and also remember with fondness some things and play off of them because they were good things. Everybody has a story. We're all products of our past in some way or another. So guys, here's what I want you to hear. The journey to manhood, real manhood, always starts by looking back. You've got to go there. Some of it can be incredibly joy-filled, and some of it could be painful, and some of it is festering wounds that will be important for you guys on this journey with me through these next few weeks to address or think about, to be part of your action plan. Because you've got to connect the past with the present and live an examined life, not an unexamined one. So I'm going to finish our time today on your outline by looking at what I call 6 looking back truths. Now these apply to everybody in the room. Here's the first one. The examined past is crucial to a healthy manhood. Without examination, the good from our past can go unappreciated, and the bad can unconsciously rule us. As I told you, when I finally launched out into life, I had a lot of buried emotion except anger. And let me tell you, when you get married and your sole emotion is anger, it doesn't work too well. And so I got to tell you, I did a lot of troublemaking in the early years of my marriage. And I couldn't explain it. My wife would say, "Why are you so angry? Why do you just go off like that?" There were little triggers that I didn't understand. But anytime she made me, by just even questioning something, that I wasn't good enough at it, as innocent as some of those things were, I would just blow up. And she was wondering why I'm just being driven all the time. I mean, here's just a little picture of my drivenness. Who works 2 full-time jobs and works on 3 master's degrees at the same time? I did. I did that. People thought I was crazy. It was crazy. But see, I thought if I succeeded in all those areas, I was like an addict. If I did well at school, and I did well at school, and the feedback would come, it was kind of like an adrenaline rush, an addiction that told me, "Hey, Robert, you're okay." See, if you can't connect that and deal with it, then you're 60 years old and driving yourself like that. And you still don't understand it. You've got to appreciate the good of the past And you've got to pull up the things that may be unconsciously ruling you and deal with it. And that's what I did when I had my little group of 2 guys telling our story. And it unlocked some things that freed me up. And I hope that'll happen to you as well if you are in some of the same situations that I was in. Here's a second looking back truth. When a boy fails to connect with his dad, demons of one kind or another often fill that void. Now, as I told you, 41% of all families today, the children don't have dad there. That's a social tragedy. And of the ones who do have dad there, sometimes he doesn't connect with them like my dad. He's kind of invisible. When that happens, regardless of how it's discussed in our society, that creates a void, especially in young boys, and demons fill it. I want to use this video clip for just a second, and because sometimes it's good to feel what I'm talking about, and I think this video clip does a good job of helping us feel what I just said.
Now, you going to tell Will or not?
I'm not going to do your dirty work for you.
Fine. I'll call him from the road.
Yeah, then why don't you do that?
Yeah, I'll do that. Daddy-O! What's up? Will, man, I'm glad you're here. Some business came up I got to handle. So we're going to have to put our trip on hold. You understand?
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool.
Just for a couple of weeks.
I understand.
Yeah. Maybe a little longer.
Yeah, whatever.
Look, I'll call you next week and we'll iron out the details. Okay?
Yeah.
It was great seeing you, son.
You too, Lou.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, Will.
You know what? Actually, this works out better for me. You know, the Slimmies of summer come to class wearing next to nothing. You know what I'm saying?
Will, it's all right to be angry.
Hey, why should I be mad? I'm saying, at least he said goodbye this time. I just wish I hadn't wasted my money buying this stupid present.
I'm sorry. If there was something that I
Hey,
could
you know
do-
what? You ain't got to do nothing, Uncle Phil. Hey, ain't like I'm still 5 years old, you know? Ain't like I'm gonna be sitting up every night asking my mom, when's Daddy coming home, you know? Who needs him? Hey, he wasn't there to teach me how to shoot my first basket, but I learned, didn't I? Hey, I got pretty damn good at it too, didn't I,
Yeah,
Uncle Phil?
you did.
Got through my first date without him, right? I learned how to drive, I learned how to shave, I learned how to fight without him. I had 14 great birthdays without him. He never even sent me a damn card. To hell with him! I ain't need him then and I don't need him now.
Will.
Nah, you know what, Uncle Phil? I'm gonna get through college without him. I'm gonna get a great job without him. I'm gonna marry me a beautiful honey, and I'm gonna have me a whole bunch of kids. I'm gonna be a better father than he ever was. And I sure as hell don't need him for that, because ain't a damn thing he could ever teach me about how to love my kids. How come he don't want me, man?
Okay, everybody take a deep breath. But you know what? That's life. That's a lot of American life that you just saw. The hole dad leaves in a son's heart opens that door to demons. And the demons that come in that fill that space are things like alcoholism and workaholism, machoism, dominating women, pornography, thrill-seeking, violence, and other extremes. And those extremes are seeking relief. But the relief doesn't come. And if you don't connect the dots, all of that is really trying to compensate for the lack of Dad's love and the lack of Dad's affirmation, his attention, and his instruction. Will's on a journey. But until he works that through and finds healing, he may achieve all the things that he said in that video. But listen, guys, everybody look at me. Because I've been there. He won't be free. He won't be free. When a boy fails to connect with his dad, demons often fill that void. Here's truth number 3. Many men have yet to reckon their past or close out what I call the unfinished business of their past. Now, it doesn't have to be just in relationship with Dad. I mean, you could be growing up and maybe a tragedy struck your family. Your brother was killed in a car accident. Or one of your best friends died of cancer and you didn't know how to reconcile that with God and religion and life and all those things. Maybe your parents suffered a divorce when you were 13. Maybe there was some abuse in your family and you were the one abused. I mean, I just talked to a guy the other day who his memory was beating up his dad at 16 and then walking out and never coming back. Maybe there's abandonment. Maybe there's some family weirdness that you've covered up and you don't know how to deal with it. So you just stuffed it. That's what I call unfinished business. But regardless of maybe your past and what you experienced, the unfinished business that needs to be dealt with, hey, it doesn't go away. There are some guys, they don't realize this, but they're still trying to win Dad's approval or Mom's approval, and they're 55 years old. They don't know that, but that's what's driving them. They're still looking for somehow for Dad to look at them and go, "Son, I'm really proud of you now." But that doesn't come, so they just work harder to make that maybe happen. I remember I had a good friend in Tucson, Arizona. He was trying to finish his dissertation, his PhD in philosophy at the University of Chicago. And I remember we were having coffee in a cafe one day, and he said, "I'm ditching my dissertation." I said, "You've been working on it for years." His degree. Couldn't believe it. I said, "Bill, why?" He said, "Because when I finish it, my dad will still find something wrong with it." I mean, we went from a PhD in philosophy to this gigantic jump into the past that was primal. And it was holding him back from a free life. Some guys like me, unknowingly are trying to redeem the family name. I wanted Lewis to mean something, so I was going to make it mean something, no matter what it did to me. Some men blame their past and because of things they didn't have or wasn't exposed to or didn't have the joy of having, then just assume they're not worth it and they become these helpless victims. And so they play out that script in adulthood to keep proving I'm not worth it. And to keep proving I'm a helpless victim because that's my script. Even though they really didn't need to do that. Some men are driven by their past. I had a good friend who he was just turning 70. And he had made some incredibly good business deals and was, for most of us here, fabulously wealthy. And yet he was working 60, 70-hour weeks. And so I just happened to mention to him, because we'd gotten to be friends, I said, "Why are you working so hard? You don't need to do that." And he said to me these words. He said, "Robert," he said, "when I was growing up, when I was a little boy, my folks lived in this ugly trailer on the outside of town. And he said, one day I was going to go catch the bus, and I got down off the cinder blocks that opened the door to my yard from my trailer, and I was walking towards the bus, and I turned around and I saw that trailer. And I said to myself these words, I'm going to get as far away from that trailer as I can. And so I'm still trying to get away from the trailer." That is so primal. But that's so real life, guys. That's life. We drive ourselves and we do strange things because in our bag of life, there's unfinished business that needs to be dealt with. And some of you guys have that. Unfinished business that's shaping the kind of person you are today. Truth number 4 is this: until a man deals with the unhealthy themes or pain from his past, he can never be truly free. At some point, and I think we're at that point, I think one of the reasons you're here is maybe to hear this, because it's a good starting place for you to as a young man, to kind of align your wheels better as a man and deal with some things that'll make your life go stronger, go straighter and stronger and cleaner in the years ahead, is so that you can be free from some of those unhealthy things. Playing the victim because of your past, listen, that's not manhood. That's boyhood. Working all the time so you can prove to yourself that I'm okay, like I did, that's not manhood. That's boyhood. Denying your feelings rather than grieving over what you missed, just admitting, I missed stuff. That's not manhood. That's boyhood. Controlling others and everything around you because you grew up in chaos and you're not going to let that happen. You're going to make sure that things turn out right, even if you have to squeeze everybody to death. That's not manhood. That's boyhood. Disconnecting from your feelings and from others and numbing out, as so many guys do today with pornography or alcohol or drugs, just because you don't really want to feel those things. You don't know that's what's happening, but that's what's happening. That's not manhood. That's boyhood, regardless of how you look. You've got to deal with those unhealthy things. 5th, and this is real important, you cannot become a real man without help. There is no such thing, let me say it again, there is no such thing as a self-made man. Proverbs 17:17 says it this way, the wisdom book of the Bible. As iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. Basically, what that's just saying, if you want to live well as a man, you've got to have other men around you that sharpen you in life, that bring out the best in you and also correct the worst in you. And that's going to create sparks, but that's so important for a healthy masculinity. You know, there were 2 men in my journey early on that made a big difference, that kind of corrected me to get me kind of back where I think was a healthy course. The first happened in high school with a high school coach. His name was Coach Garrett. And he was a very famous coach in Louisiana, but I was playing on the football team, and for whatever reason, maybe because, remember, small town, everybody knows about you. He probably knew some of the things I was going through. But because of that, he took, besides being a coach, he kind of took a special interest in me. And I remember he could just say little things that would just make my spirit soar. He'd come, pat me on the helmet, and say something like, I'm proud of you, Lewis. And I would just feel 10 feet tall. But on one occasion in my senior year, we were walking off the field and he called me back. He said, Lewis, come here. And I came and took off my helmet and I was standing there and he put his hands on my shoulders and he just said, Lewis, you're good. Now, if I was making a movie, I would suddenly make that me standing in front of King Arthur and he was knighting me as a young guy. I suddenly felt like I am good because somebody I respect breathed life into me. See, that's what happens with the help of other men. Now, there was one other guy that made a big difference in my life that I'll tell you about later, not today. But there were 2 men that really shaped my life and got me on course. But the point is this. Listen guys, there is no self-made man. There are a lot of self-successful men. You can be successful alone. You can build your own empire. You can develop your skills and hone them to where people admire you and that kind of thing. But those external skills and that external power is one thing, but to be healthy and whole and integrated inside with the outside, you can't get there except through the help of other men. And remember I said in the session last week that we men tend to withdraw and talk to ourselves? This is so important. You can't get there that way. Not with your manhood. Because if you try, you'll end up with a short-sighted manhood, an imbalanced manhood, a manhood that's riddled with blind spots that you're not even aware of, and they grow deeper as you grow older to a place where if you're not listening, everybody's talking about your blind spots behind your back. And you think everything's okay. And that ends in regret. But there's no self-made man. Then our last one as we finish, a sixth looking back truth. For better or for worse, we are all significantly shaped by the kind of family life we experienced. But though we are each a product of our past, no one has to be a prisoner of the past unless he chooses to be. Let me say that again. No one has to be a prisoner of his past unless he chooses to be. And you can choose to be that way, either by denying your past, ignoring it, or surrendering to it. Be sure you hear that last statement, by the way. The past helps explain how we are, the way we are today, and who we are, but no one in this room is doomed to follow the script of the past, the hurtful ones especially, unless you choose to be. Unless you choose to follow that past. Please write this down on your notes, this statement. We are not prisoners of the past. We don't have to be like soldier number 6 in the Royal Artillery, just standing there not really sure who he is and how he got there. No, instead, by taking the time to examine our history and examine our story and understanding it and looking back, we get the privilege of honoring a lot of good things that maybe we've forgotten about our past that have made us who we are, and we can rejoice in that. But even more importantly, with the help of friends and maybe some wise counsel and some insight in our life, we can break free of the things that have been holding us back, things we've been feeling or doing. With their help, with the company of other men, we can be free. Let me say that again. With the company of other men, like around your table, we can be free and integrated as healthy men. Because let me tell you, the road to manhood, and it's a little difficult for some of you guys to hear this morning, I know. It was for me. But the road to manhood always starts by turning around and looking back. You have to do that. And you can be free. It can be done. And guys, here's the good news. Next week, in our next session, we're going to discuss how you do that. Have a great week.